something really good, a hot topic in the news this week. He's been charged with crime. This is a show where I try to educate real stories. Thank you for watching Truth and Justice with Vivian King. My co-host is Damion Walker, Cognitive Justice International. And my special guest tonight is Kevin Bruno. So I'm excited to hear his story. You know, this is a show where we talk about the criminal justice system. People tell their story so we can learn more about the system and hopefully encourage young people to stay out of the system. But Kevin, thank you for agreeing to be on the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you. So we usually start off by just trying to find out something about you. I usually try to take a poll and try to figure out when did life go wrong for you or you start making bad choices. But I want to get into your story. It's one of 28 years in prison, 2 times, 8 years at one stint and 20 years on another stint. So I know there's a lot to tell there, but I want to start from the beginning. Like, where were you raised, 2-family home, brothers and sisters, and what separated you from the pack? You know, a lot of times people say that, you know, you can be a policeman, I can be a gangster. We're the same people. We raised from the same environment. We just make different choices. So sometimes I want to know why people make choices, share that with our audience, the bad part of it, and you know, maybe where you could have made a better choice, and to try to encourage young people to make better choices, and to tell people how they get back into the positive light of the system, the reentry programs that you work with, right, to encourage people even after you fall and you make the wrong choice, you still can make the right choice and turn it around. So it's kind of a story. We want to tell stories of redemption.
Right.
All right, so tell us about you.
Born and raised in Trinity Gardens. Mother and father still together. Well, my father just passed.
Wow.
They were together 62 years. So it wasn't because I had I was coming from a broken family. Trinity Gardens at that time was kind of rough. So it was one of those, you dive into the deep end and learn how to swim in that neighborhood. I was a very, very sensitive child. So a lot of things that I went through kind of formed the person that I became later on. I was 6 foot tall, 12 years old, 210 pounds.
Oh wow, you're a big kid.
Yeah, so I always looked like an adult. But because I looked like an adult, but I still thought with the 12-year-old's mind, I became easy prey for a lot of people who wanted to persecute someone or make themselves look big, because here's a big guy. You can pick on him because you know he's got a 12-year-old mentality, so he's not gonna fight and retaliate the way you would think he would. So I think that persecution early on kind of started to form the person that I ended up becoming. Because one of the things that we find out later on in life is that 97% of the people in prisons have suffered some type of childhood trauma.
Right.
So that to me was extremely traumatic. Family life it wasn't difficult, but it wasn't roses. My father was a strict disciplinarian. My father was I loved him with everything in me, but you know, I mean, he had his own issues as well. So those things were passed on to me, I think, by way of our interactions. Started acting out very early. I remember acting out in elementary school, and it progressed to junior high school. They call it middle school now. Then it progressed on to high school, where I started to, as a way of my family trying to build my confidence, put me in boxing. And once I learned that I could fight, after being persecuted for all those years, I kind of went crazy. It was like, okay, now the light is on. I don't have to be persecuted. But the problem is I went from one extreme to the other. I went from being 12 years old.
Okay.
I went from being persecuted to being the persecutor, because now I know I can fight. And now I know that, the people who were picking on me, I have the same opportunity to get the retribution that I'm thinking as a 12 or 13-year-old child. I'm thinking in those terms. By the time I was 15, I was all over the place. I had started my decline as far as my interactions with the police, my interactions with people, my lack of a desire to interact with people. I started to not want to interact with people more in terms of getting to know people rather than just being physical with people. I wanted to be the aggressor now.
So what does that mean? Give me an example of what you mean.
Well, instead of meeting people and wanting to socialize and create that social bond, my thing was I had to always prove myself. I had to always prove to everybody that I came into contact with, every man that I came into contact with, that the image of me that they may not even recognize, they may not have known me, but inside of me there was always that image that other people would see. The guy who got persecuted, the guy who got picked on, the guy who got teased and all of this. So when I got to be a young adult, 15, 16 years old, I may perceive that you see the old me. So rather than allow you to see the old me, I became somebody else. I became that person who would immediately hit you for saying something, just something slight, who looked for a fight, who always looked to be the aggressor. So, and I think, again, that was a byproduct of the persecution as a child.
Now, when you say persecute, is that like bullied or like teased,
Absolutely.
or beat up, or hit upside the head, or stole your money? What were people doing?
All of the above.
And it was that bad to
It was that bad?
Absolutely.
Everybody that you
absolutely.
Did you have siblings?
Yes.
Tell me about your siblings.
How
many?
Two brothers that were my actual brothers, and one brother who was adopted. He was my father's cousin, and my father and my mother adopted him younger. He was older than all of us. So, yeah.
They let them pick on you if they were older?
Well, my brother Jim, the one that was adopted, had no idea.
Okay.
My brother Ronnie was in his own world. So, nobody. First of all, I wasn't proud of it, so I wasn't broadcasting. I wasn't going home and telling people that I was getting picked on.
I see.
Because I didn't want anybody to know that I was getting picked on. I didn't go home and tell my mother or my father that some guys beat me up at school today.
Okay.
My brother Ronnie would come and ask me about something that maybe he heard during school, but it was never me going home and saying these people are picking on me and I need somebody to help me. It was never that. What I did in turn was find individuals who I viewed as being the stronger people in the schools, and these were usually the bullies. These were usually the guys who at 12, 13, 14 years old were already smoking and drinking. They were already on the outside. So it was easy for them to accept me because they were outcast, and here I am an outcast. So they were the ones who actually started to build up my confidence and try to push me in a direction of being someone different other than the guy who's being picked on. Because when I started hanging out with them, if somebody picked on me, they would say, Bruno, don't let them people do you like that. And that encouragement gave me a little bit of courage. Add to that the fact that I had just started learning to fight, and you said you threw a match on some gasoline because I went crazy. It was like, okay, now I understand I don't have to put up with that. So I never gave people opportunity to put me in that position again.
So with all this fighting, was some of that going on at the school where you got put out of school?
Absolutely. It was going on at every school. I got kicked out of, the first school I got kicked out of as a young adult was Sam Houston. And it was because they were having riots at that time at Sam Houston. Because it was during that time that the integration had already happened, but nobody was comfortable with integration at Sam Houston because Sam Houston had been a predominantly white school. So at Sam Houston, when I got there, coming from Burbank Junior High School, when I got to Sam Houston High School, there was always the tension between whites and blacks. And I would hear about the persecution of blacks by whites at Sam Houston. My first reaction was to lash out. I didn't wait for whites to persecute me. I went into the hallways. My oldest brother told me the story about them talking about me going into the hallway and fighting 3 white guys because they hadn't done anything, but because there had been a riot and some guys, black guys, had gotten jumped on. So my idea was just go in there and just start fighting whoever I saw that was of a different color. So I got into a fight with a number of white men white young men in the hallway, and they kicked me out of school. Told me I had to leave Sam Houston. So from Sam Houston, I went to Kashmir. Well, Kashmir is predominantly black, a few Hispanics at that time. But I got into it with a white coach who, some say he didn't say it, I say he did, who may have called me that N-word, and I had a fit, so they shipped me away from Kashmir. I ended up at...
You fought the coach?
I didn't physically abuse him, but I kind of verbally abused him and threatened to fight him.
Okay.
And that was enough for them to say, nah, you can't be here. So I ended up going to M.B. Smiley. M.B. Smiley was basically the same thing as Sam Houston. Mm-hmm. There was that integration between black and whites. I actually remember the time, because at that time, the time we got to Smiley, they were teaching archery. I had never been to a black school where they were teaching archery or where they had tennis courts and this. So Smiley wasn't designed for an African-American community at that time.
A lot of people wouldn't know that because of what it is now.
Yeah, right. But when you know, because if you drive by Smiley now, there's still a jet plane in front of the school. They weren't putting jet airplanes in front of black schools back then, because what would that symbolize for any African-American kid at that time? So when I got to Smiley, it was basically the same thing, and I still had the same attitude. You know, I still had the same, we are going to punish you for trying to persecute us as African-Americans in these schools. And
so what would your parents say about this?
Oh, my mother and father were. Well, actually, I did a good job of hiding it at one time, but until they got to the point where I had to leave the school.
Right. And
then it was those good old-fashioned whippings you used to get, but they didn't stick with me. They didn't. I was beyond that.
Were your parents big? Is your father big?
My father was 6 foot.
Your mother's tall.
My mother's 5'9". So I mean, it wasn't like, you know, he was a small man, but he wasn't a big man either.
Right. How tall are you now?
I'm 6'3". Okay.
So you didn't grow much more after 12.
No. Started smoking cigarettes and all that, and that stunted my growth. I was smoking cigarettes at 12, so I wanted to be with the tough guys. Mm-hmm. Yeah, with the tough guys. I didn't want to be the wimp. I wanted to be with the tough guys. So whatever the tough guys were doing, that's what I was doing. But I got kicked out of Smiley because of my rowdy behavior, and then decided that I just wasn't going to school anymore.
Okay.
I was done. You know, I was 15 and I was done. That was it. No more school for me, nothing. So
no, at this time at 15, are you smoking cigarettes, smoking dope?
I'm
drinking?
Smoking cigarettes, I'm smoking weed, I'm snorting cocaine, I'm snorting pills, I'm drinking alcohol, I was living with when I left my parents' home, I ran away, and I was living with a prostitute in 3rd Ward. Mm. So I was just...
At 15?
Yeah.
Wow.
I was out there. I was as bad as you can think at that age. You know, I mean, whatever you could have done or thought to do, I had probably already done it. And if I hadn't done it, it was on my list of things to do in the very near future. Mm. So.
Did you keep in touch with your brothers at that time?
No, well, one of my brothers, my oldest brother, Ronnie, he and I lived together. He let me live with him for a short time.
Well, let's talk about the 15 and the prostitute. How did you get out of that situation?
I just left. I was at that time, I was living basically on the streets.
Okay.
I was back and forth. You know, I didn't want to live at my parents' home. So I would, at 15, I was kind of charismatic, so I would end up in relationships with older women.
Okay.
And would live there for a period of time.
I see.
And move from place to place to place. There was no just particular place that I was at all the times. Finally ended up going back home to my parents' home.
At what age?
17. And ended up going into the Marine Corps the following year. And lo and behold, kicked out of the Marine Corps.
Was it another? Was it a white officer?
White co-workers.
Okay.
So, because I mean, when I got to, and I don't blame. Here's the thing about this is right now at this time, I fully accept everything that I've done. You know, I have responsibility for all the decisions I've made. But at that time, I didn't know anything about accepting responsibility for anything that I've done. I knew that I was being persecuted, and I knew that I wasn't going to stand for the persecution. All this coming from the 12-year-old who has been persecuted for all of these years. I had a really big problem with people of different colors because one of the biggest things that kind of gave me that transition. There was my mother sent me and my brother to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on the bus.
For what?
Just to visit with my uncle. Her brother was there. When we got to New Orleans, you got to remember I'm 6 foot tall. I've actually got a little goatee and a mustache at 12. So I've got a half-price ticket though. Mm-hmm. So we got to the bus. This white guy, the bus driver, looked at me. He looked at my ticket, looked at me. He said, and these were his words, "Nigga, I don't know who you talk to, but you ain't getting on this bus for half price." And my brother and I were like, "What you talking about?" You know. So we stood there with my mouth open. You know, I mean, I was kind of crushed at that time because this man called me a nigger. Then he's not gonna let me on the bus because he telling me I'm not 12 years old.
Right, and your mother's bought the ticket.
Yeah.
So, you know, what are you supposed to do at 12?
Well, we called my mother. She threatened to sue Greyhound. They got us on the next bus out of there as quickly as they could. But that was another one of those things that kind of helped form my rebelliousness. Mm-hmm. You know. So I ended up going through all of that, went to the Marine Corps, got kicked out.
How long did you stay in?
Less than a year.
Okay.
Yeah, less than a year. Got home, and now I'm a fugitive because I went AWOL. After they kicked me out, after they actually, let me give you the entire story to that. I got into trouble. I got prosecuted in the Marine Corps. Got a bad conduct discharge for, they worded it so crazily, but conduct unbecoming of a Marine or whatever that meant. So got kicked out. I had 6 months in the brig, 6 months forfeiture of all pay, and a bad conduct discharge. I didn't end up doing the 6 months because the young lady that I was married to at the time did something, I don't know what she did, but they ended up letting me go because she was supposed to be ill. She wasn't ill, but she wanted me home. And they let me out, but I was supposed to return. I couldn't imagine turning myself back into a prison to finish doing time. So when my lawyer called me, I never forget his name was Mr. Ardonis. When Mr. Ardonis called me, Captain Ardonis called me, he said, "Bruno, I need you to turn yourself in, man." I said, because you're gonna right now you're in a position where you can turn all of this stuff around. You can get your BCD upgraded, you can do some other things. But if you don't come back, you don't stand a chance. I didn't care.
Yeah.
How old were you?
I was 18, getting ready to be, I was 18.
And you were already married?
Yeah. I married a young lady who at this point in time, I would say would probably have been the best position I would have put myself in for life. But I was too young to understand that, you know, so I blew that opportunity. She was an amazing woman, still an amazing woman today, but I was too young to understand that. So yeah, if I had listened to, I won't call her name. I don't want to. She's married now. I don't want to get her in trouble.
Right.
But if I had listened to that would have been different. That would have been a different situation. It probably would have been a different situation. We wouldn't be having this conversation. I'm pretty sure. So I was a refugee. I was a fugitive, And I couldn't live at my parents' home because I knew that if the Marine Corps started looking for me, they would come to my parents' home. So I was basically on the streets back and forth, living here and living there. And I remember waking up one time in an abandoned apartment because it had been pouring down rain, and the place that I had been living with, the young lady I was living with, I couldn't get to at that time because it was raining. So I ducked into this apartment. The electricity was on. I turned the heat on and sat in there for a while, ended up dozing off, and I woke up because the maintenance man came in, and he looked at me. I just knew he was going to tell somebody. He looked at me, he went in, did something that he needed to do, and left. I got up and left. And then I started thinking, this isn't, I can't keep doing this. So there was a guy that I knew, a friend of mine, who had been doing robberies. They had been robbing savings and loans. And he had gotten hooked up with a guy from New York who talked him into doing robberies. So they came up to me one day and said, Bruno, man, I know you're out here hustling, man. You're out here struggling. I got something for you. Told me about the robbery thing. So I'm open to this because I can get money, I can get off the streets, I can do some of the things I want to do. We pulled the robbery at a savings and loan and ended up getting $40,000 out of that first robbery. I was hooked. That was it. That was all it took for me to have my whole mindset changed, where I knew that this is what I'm going to do this. I can do this. I wasn't thinking about long term. I'm thinking about, I can go rob these savings and loans. As easy as this was, no security guard, no nothing. I can go rob these savings and loans, and I can sustain myself. I'm not thinking in terms of long-term sustainment. I'm thinking about right now, I can go in there because on my bed at the hotel I was staying at is $40,000. And
This was your cut? This was everything?
No, this was everything.
Okay.
My cut was supposed to be $15,000. I ended up
Less than that.
No, I ended up with a little more than that. So
Strong
I
arm.
wasn't trying to be. I wasn't. Let's just say I wasn't. We know I wasn't honest at that time. So, but after that, there started to be a string of robberies. And
you stayed in hotels then? You didn't buy a house with $30,000?
No, I didn't. I wasn't thinking in terms of buying a house.
Okay,
I wasn't thinking about. And I understand, and logically, one of the things.
1982, you could buy one in the neighborhood you grew up.
One of the things my mother told me is that, boy, you should have took some of that money and put it up so I could put it on your books when you went to prison. But that was the first time. I got 8 years and 4 months. Actually, I got 25 years sentence out of that.
You didn't do Fed time?
No, at that time, savings and loans had just got turned over to the states.
Okay.
So all the states were handling the savings and loans robberies rather than the Fed.
And how old were you?
I was getting ready to turn 19. I was 19.
19.
Yeah, I was 19 because I turned 20.
And I was gonna say, I think it's a good point too. I want to back up a little bit because my favorite story that you have. Talk a little bit about the boxing and how far did you take it, and what are some experiences you had with the boxing?
He loves this.
He loves the boxing.
He loves the boxing. I never tell this story, but Damion tells this story to everybody.
You got to give us the ages in which the story is.
Well, I started boxing at 12.
Right.
I was 6 foot tall. One of the things, and I ended up being one of the top heavyweights in the United States and in Texas as an amateur. But one of the advantages that I had was I was 12 years old. I was 6 foot tall. I weighed 210 pounds. There were no heavyweights in our gym that were my size or that were at that age. So I ended up having to train with professionals. Everybody in our gym that I could train with, that I could spar with, were professionals. So by the time I got to be a seasoned fighter as an amateur, I was better than most of the people who had been fighting for years and years and years because my training came from professional fighters. Damon's favorite part of my story is that when they were filming the movie Muhammad Ali, before the first director died.
Now, which movie is that? Is that the one with Will Smith?
No, this was the original one. What was the name of that movie? The Greatest? Was it The Greatest? I don't know. I think it was The Greatest. Kids from our gym were extras in the movie.
No, what gym was that?
This was Galena Park Boxing Academy in Galena Park. Kenny Weldon was my trainer. He passed a couple of years ago. A great man. Man, I loved him with everything in me. Gave me everything I could have asked for, except the confidence to do the things that I needed to do as a professional fighter. But so our gym was being renovated. They moved us downtown to Benbow's Gymnasium on Congress, just off of Main. I don't think it's there anymore. As a matter of fact, I know it's not there anymore. And they were filming part of the movie, The Greatest, at Benbow's. Ali came in, and I was enamored with the man. I've never had an idol before, but Muhammad Ali was my idol. And he came in, and they started talking back and forth, and he was looking around the gym and talking about who he was going to box and who he was going to beat up, and somebody mentioned my name, and I got in the ring and let him punch me in the face a few times,
like I was,
like I was some kind
of. 12?
Yeah, well, I was at that time. I must have been 13, but I was tall and I was.
Yeah, but you're not ready to take no punches from the heavyweight champion of the world.
At that point, I would have taken those and some more from him. Because actually after that night, we came back to the hotel where he was staying. He was staying at the Rice Hotel. Me and a friend of mine came back and stood outside of his hotel until he came out. One of my greatest stories about Muhammad Ali, and one of the reasons that I loved him dearly, was because of what he showed me this night. He came out of his hotel, clean, he and his wife, and you could tell they were getting ready to go somewhere. But an old wino came around the corner, filthy, drunk, staggering, older guy, hair matted. I mean, although we couldn't smell him, you could look at him and tell that this man was anything but clean. Ali walked up to the man, because the man started hollering, "I know you the champ, you Cassius Clay." Well, his name was Muhammad Ali at this time.
Right.
So Ali was telling him, "What's my name?" and playing with him like he did one of his fights, and throwing punches at him. "What's my name?" And "You Cassius Clay, you Cassius Clay." Ali grabbed this man and bear hugged him. And hugged him and held on to him.
As filthy as he was.
As filthy as he was, and as clean as Ali was.
Wow.
And held this man and whispered in his ear. And the man started crying. Ali reached his hand out to his wife. She put a big wad of bills in his hand, and he stuck them in the man's pocket.
Wow.
And continued to hug the man and talk to him, not trying to demean him or anything.
Whispering to him.
Yeah. And when the man walked off, he said, "Man, you the greatest, you the greatest." And Ali acted like it wasn't, like it wasn't a big deal. He didn't go back in the hotel to change clothes. I was like, how could you ever have anything negative to say about this man? But people didn't see that side of him.
Right.
I had the opportunity to see that side of him. So
Did he talk to y'all, the kids? Or he was just talking to the wino?
No, he didn't talk to us because he actually didn't see us by the time, when he came out, we were waiting for him.
Okay.
But the man came around the corner.
And beat y'all too.
So yeah, but I couldn't have asked for a better opportunity to watch him. Because him talking to me would have been one thing. But me having the opportunity to watch him and form that opinion of him at that early of an age, that was moving for me. So, but it wasn't moving enough to keep me from going to prison.
I know that's right. I hear you. Because right after that you robbed a bank.
Right after that, I decided I was going to be a crook and robbing savings and loans, started paying dividends for me, and it kept me off the streets. And it gave me that false sense of security and that false sense of I guess achievement, or you feel like you're somebody because you got a bunch of money, but you still hadn't done anything.
Right.
Got arrested, got an aggravated 25-year sentence, did 8 years and 4 months. Came home in 1990. By 1991, I was on my way back to prison with an aggravated 60-year sentence for the same thing.
So as soon as you got out, you did the same thing
Yeah.
after 8 years. Now tell me what was going on in your mind those 8 years.
There was
8 years of...
one of the problems we have with prisons right now.
8 years. I mean, I'm just saying, 8 years. You
Yeah.
just think after doing 8 years at
Yeah.
19, you'd come out and at least try to do
I was
better.
planning. You probably.
Well, but this is what I'm going to tell you. One of the problems that they had, it's not as prevalent now as it was then, but there was a problem with prisons back then where there was nothing for you to do. In prison. So there was inmates would sit around and tell lies.
And this is
to
like
each other.
1982 to 1990.
To 1990.
Okay.
Yeah. And they had Ruiz had just been passed. but they weren't. They hadn't.
Remind us what Ruiz is.
Ruiz was when the courts ordered that. At one time, the prisons were run by inmates. Inmates had all the keys. Inmates did all the counting. Inmates controlled all the ingress and egress. Inmates ran the whole prison. Well,
Was Ruiz the guy that tried to break out?
yeah, they had a riot over at
there by
at the Walls
San
unit.
State.
At the Walls unit,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But because of and they were doing that
was
in
the
protest.
70s, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was in the late 70s. So we're talking
You know
about
what's
82.
real funny? I think I was at a cheerleading camp at Sam Houston State when that was going on, and they did the lockdown. It was in the 70s. I was in high school. I think it might have been like 1975 or something like that. I think I remember it because they said, you know, because we could see the prisoners over there, like
Right.
the ones on the roofs and stuff like that.
Right.
They said it's on lockdown, and they had to warn the kids, the high school kids, who were
Right.
there for cheerleading practice that summer. I think I was there.
Yeah. Well, they, as a result of that, they filed a lawsuit saying that the conditions in the prisons were inhumane, and they were, because you got inmates who are beating other inmates to death because the guards want them to do this.
Right.
It was state-sanctioned murders. Some of it, you know, I mean, it was chaos.
Wow.
So when I got there, the Ruiz judgment had been passed, but it hadn't been fully implemented. So there were still inmates running the prison. And the first thing that I understood was I had already been persecuted as a young man. I wasn't going back to the persecution. So I made up my mind that I was going to be the worst of the worst in prison.
Ooh.
Yeah, because I wasn't going to allow you to send me back to 12 years old where I'm getting persecuted every day. And the persecution in prison does not compare to
Right.
the persecution you suffer
We-
as a kid on the streets.
Right.
So I just became that monster. I became that guy who you didn't want to talk to, who you didn't want to see, who you didn't want to have conflict with, because not only would I retaliate, but I would do so viciously, not just beat you up, but in my mind, I needed to hurt you, and I needed people to see me hurt you because other people then wouldn't come towards me. I was scared to death.
Right.
When I got to prison, right? When I got to prison, I was scared to death. No one would believe how frightened I was of going to prison. But no one was ever going to see that I was frightened about coming to prison because you were going to have to look beyond my violence to see the fear that I had. So the problem I had with that is I lived that for 8 years and 4 months. Then I got out and I didn't know how to turn that off. You know, you become this person so you can survive.
Right.
But when you get out, okay, now you're no longer in that environment. And TDC does nothing to try to help you integrate
Right.
into society without that mindset.
Right.
So when I got out, I didn't know, you know, I didn't, my parents used to talk about how, we talked about this before, afterwards, about how I would go upstairs in my room and just lock the door and just disappear. It was difficult for me to interact with people. I didn't know how to interact on a societal level in a free society because I'm used to prison after 8 years and 4 months. So when the opportunity presented itself for me to commit another robbery, I did.
How long were you out?
9 months.
You got 9 months.
8 years. I did 8 years and 4 months, then I was out 9 months. Right back. 1990 to 1991, I was back. And got an aggravated 60-year sentence, which meant I had to do 15 years flat just to come up for parole. Somewhere along the line, my mindset changed.
But when you went back in, were you that same person when you initially got out? Or did it take time for your mindset to change?
Oh yeah, I was that same person when I initially got out.
Did you go
It
back
took
to
a
the same
while.
prisons?
It took a while. Well, no, I ended up going to, when I first got out, when I first got back, I'm trying to remember what unit I went to. I can't even remember what unit I went to when I got back the second time. No, I don't remember.
Okay.
But things started to change for me because my family had started to suffer as a result of the decisions I was making. my mother and I have always had a very, very strong bond. I didn't want to break that. She said she doesn't remember this, but she came to see me one time, and she said she had slipped and fallen down the stairs at the house, and she said she sat on the steps and just cried because she was tired. You know, she was tired of from all the things that I had put her through, just physically tired. She said she doesn't remember that. This is live on Facebook, so she may not appreciate me saying that.
Life, this is about your experience.
It is. So, but that was for me. That was the change, the turning point for me. The fact that I didn't want to keep persecuting my family. I didn't want to keep dragging my family through this. My father came to see me. I had been on Cofield, and I'd gotten into a fight upstairs, and me and the guy fought in the day room for about 45 minutes. When the officers came there to get us, we were on our hands and knees trying to fight each other, and nobody had any energy to do anything. Blood was everywhere. I ended up in SEG. So my father and my mother came to see me at Cofield, and when they bring you into the visitation room, and when you're in that SEG, they put you in a little cage so that you can visit with your family. You have to back your hands up and let them take the handcuffs off of you. And my father sat and looked at me. I'll never forget this. My father looked at me with this look of disgust and anger, and finally he just said what was on his mind. He said, "Boy, you got to be the biggest damn fool in the world." And I'm like, "What?" You know, I'm rebellious. What? He said, "You in jail, in jail."
You in jail, in jail.
I said, "Boy, look." So I thought about that. That and the fact that I saw the disappointment in my family's eyes and my family's face, and it started to help me change my ideals about who I was going to be and how I was going to be. At that time, I decided I was going to be a Muslim, and started practicing Islam while I was there. Went as far as to become an imam, which was like the pastor on a couple of the units that I was that I was on. And then the biggest transition of all is I got what they call a set-off after doing 15 years flat.
They denied your parole.
Denied my parole. Not only did they deny my parole, they denied my parole and set my next parole hearing date for 2 years from that date.
Instead of 1 year.
Yeah, and I had done absolutely everything I was supposed to do. I had no major infractions, no major cases, no nothing while I was in prison. So when they told me that I had a 2-year set-off, I was crushed.
But you just said you did have that big old long fight with that guy.
Yeah, but that was prior. That was before the 20-year, before the
That was
before
an
the
8-year.
Yeah, that was an 8-year. That was before I had to do this time.
Okay.
But what they did do, and this is probably what saved me from going crazy, is they changed my job and gave me the opportunity to be a trustee. Sent me out to the horse barn. Well, you know my family is horses, so sent me out to the horse barn to work, and that was passive for me. That was like, wow, man, I can do this. I can do these next 2 years out here at the horse barn. While I was out there, they called me in for parole 2 years later, exactly 2 years later, and told me that they were going to give me parole, but I had to do 18 months at a facility. I said, okay, I can do that. So they told me what the facility was, and I went back in.
Was the facility like a halfway house?
No, it was actually Prison Fellowship Academy at the Caravans unit, which used to be just the 2 unit. But I didn't know anything about it. So I went in and I started asking guys about it, and all of my Muslim brothers said, "Man, you can't go over there." I said, "Why?" He said, "Man, that's a Christian program." And I said, "What?" I said, "Yeah." So I went to the chaplain, and I told the chaplain, I said, "Man, y'all lost y'all mind. Y'all can't make me practice a religion I don't want to practice. How you gonna send me to a program that says I have to practice Christianity?" So the man said, "You don't have to go. You can deny, you can refuse it, and they won't send you."
What was your choice?
They'll send somebody else.
Yeah, so I went back to my bunk and I thought about it. Man, I want to go home.
I know that's right.
Yeah, so I said, you know what, if I need to go over here to the Caravans unit and fake with these Christians for 18 months, I can do that. I'm thinking one thing.
Right.
God has already put a plan in motion for what he wants me to do. So when I got there, I told him I would go, and I got there. And for the first, because you have to wait a while before they put you in the program. So I was there about 3 or 4 months before I actually got into the program. So I ended up being over there about 22 months. So when I got there, I was miserable. Everything was Jesus Christ. Everything was these brothers hugging on you and want to pray for you and all this. And I was like, man, I had the worst attitude. I said, man, if y'all don't get away from me with that, I joined the Islamic community there. I'm gonna give you my testimony right quick.
Okay, come on with it.
I was struggling with my religious belief at that time because I could feel God pulling me in one direction, but my pride wasn't going to let me go, and my stubbornness wasn't going to let me go in that direction. So there was this push and pull between Christianity and Islam, but I was miserable in that push and pull. So I started asking God, you need to explain to me, you need to show me what's going on, because if you're trying to move me back towards Christianity, I don't have a problem with that if this is you. Mm-hmm. But if it's not, I need you to make this clear to me.
Right.
I was in the chapel, and I can't remember the name of the organization, but they were showing Christian videos, and they usually show them in a little room in the back. This day, they were going to show them in the sanctuary. Mm. And I said, what y'all getting ready to show? Man, we got some TDJ. I said, oh, man, I'm not finna watch no Christian video. So I left, went to the day room, where they were watching the football game. Mm-hmm. And when I walked into the day room closed in on me. I just felt claustrophobic. Mm. So I turned around and I walked back out. Before I knew it, I was back at the chapel. Mm. And I sat down and they started showing the video. And I had been praying and talking to God about, how can I, if this is what you're trying to do with me, how can I reconcile this and how can I reconcile that?
Right.
And the video, TDJ started talking to me in specifics about the things that I had spoken to God about. Mm. Not in general, not so I could, easily say, well, that was coincidence.
Brush it off, yeah.
It was in specifics. And I started looking around in the chapel like, y'all playing with me. But nobody knows what I've talked to God about except God and I. So when the video was over, I was shook. I was visibly shook. McCullum walked up to me and said, man, you okay? I said, nah, man, something just happened. So I explained to him what had happened. Well, Mac was one of those shade tree preachers. I hate to say that, but so he there was no resonance between he and I, but I ended up going to talk with Lee. Okay. And Lee and I talked about it. I explained to Lee what happened and told him about what I was thinking and what was happening. And Lee and I sat down and we prayed and we read the Bible and we were touching the Bible. He would bring up a scripture and we would touch the Bible and it would just flip to that page. And it just freaked me out the whole night. I was like, wow, this is crazy. Well, you know how we do. The next morning when I woke up, nah, that wasn't real.
Right.
That wasn't real.
Right.
I was tripping. So I was laying in my bunk, talking to a guy, and in my mind I'm talking to God. I'm saying, Lord, if you want me to believe all that happened last night was real, I need some proof. So there was a young lady that I had been seeing. This was on a Sunday. She always came on Saturdays. She never came on Sundays. And she always came before 12 o'clock. So I said, if you want me to believe all that happened, let so-and-so show up down here today. So this was about 2:45, 3 o'clock, they called me. Bruno, you got a visit. So I was talking to somebody, and I said, man, that's not her. He's like, what? He didn't know what I was talking about, but I was thinking in my head. Heart started hammering in my chest, put my clothes on. We got a starching nines. I starched white clothes, put my starching nines on to go to visitation. When I got there, that little diamond-shaped window, I peeked in the window and I saw her walk into the visiting seat where we were going to sit. And I started crying. Because then the reality of God and knowing that God had actually saw fit to say, I'm going to show myself to you because I need you to do something for me. Mm. That moved me beyond, this is the first time I've been able to tell that story and not cry. Mm. Usually when I tell that story, I'm bawling. Right. This is the first time in years I've been able to tell that story and not cry. But it showed me that God actually had something for me.
Right.
and that he wanted me to know who he was. So he was going to go to this extreme
Right.
to show himself to me. So I was like, wow. I started crying in the visitation, in the shakedown room, and the guards asked me what was wrong, and I told them. One of them started crying.
One of the guards?
One of the guards started crying.
Wow.
So when I got out, Pastor Parade came by.
Yeah.
He saw me crying. He was like, "What's going on, Bruno?" Before I could get to the seat, I told him he's crying. So by the time we get to the seat,
miracle of God.
By the time we get to the seat, we got almost a whole visitation room crying because I'm telling everybody, I'm already giving my testimony,
Right.
and this just happened. So that was my transition. That was the point to where I knew that I was going to be doing something different. It wasn't easy coming out. It wasn't easy when I got out. You still had some of that old stuff that would come up. I never wanted to rob again. I never had that desire to rob again. But I still had that switch that I hadn't learned how to turn off.
Right.
I still had that old stuff that I needed to learn how to separate myself from.
Right.
So I struggled with that for a while, and started getting some help. Went to see her, got married again, took my wife through turmoil because I was dealing with, and this is one of the things that our nonprofit deals with now, I was dealing with the childhood trauma
Right.
as an adult
Right.
without knowing that I was dealing with the childhood trauma.
Right.
I was dealing with the trauma of prison as an adult without knowing that I was dealing with the trauma of prison. And I was dealing with the trauma of being released from prison without knowing that I was dealing with that trauma. So in my marriage, all of that stuff came to fruition. Everything came to the top. So we dealt with it. My marriage crumbled, but my wife and I are still friends right now. As a matter of fact, I'm doing a photo shoot for her tomorrow. But I had to find my spot. I had to
Right.
find what God had for me. So I had to find a way to shut off that switch.
Right.
I went and got some counseling, and through the counseling, I was able to start to manage that part of it. I was able to find a way to turn that switch off. I was able to find a way to be Kevin and not Bruno,
Right.
because
Right.
Bruno was associated with the guy in prison.
Right.
Kevin was the guy that loved horseback riding, loved painting, loved flowers, loved kayaking, loved all of these things that I was never able to just verbalize or show because I had to be Bruno.
Right.
So I started learning how to be Kevin. And when I started learning how to be Kevin, God started opening doors for me. I got a job working for Prison Fellowship. I ended up going back. I had an office in the same prison that I had just gotten released from. The office that I had overlooked the table that I used to sit at as an inmate when I was working in that same office. When I walked out of that office, to the left, I could look directly into the cell block and see the bunk I slept in for those years I was there.
Wow.
As a reentry specialist there, a lot of guys who were in prison when I got to prison came through, and I had an opportunity to minister to them. It was an opportunity for me to minister to a lot of the men in prison because I came back from being them to being somebody who could actually help them in prison. They ended up eliminating that position at Prison Fellowship. I won't say why. I don't want to give anybody negative publicity, but yeah, so
Lord.
they ended up eliminating that position. And I was frustrated because they eliminated the position and let us go 2 weeks before Christmas.
Oh, wow, that's cold.
That's what I said.
How many years had you done it?
With Prison Fellowship? A little over 2 years, about two and a half years. And I was frustrated. I was like, wow, this is crazy. This is, how y'all gonna do this? So in between all that time, my marriage is over. I lost my job. I can't pay for the home that I'm in and I turned this into my studio because I don't have a job.
Right.
So I ended up back at my parents' home. But this is still God doing something that I don't know He's doing. Because at that time, I'll take that back. After that, I went back to my folks' house and I started working for CMEX so I could move out of my parents' house for a company, concrete company. But God is doing something else because at this time, my father's health is taking a turn for the worse. I ended up having an accident at work and tore my rotator cuff. So now I can't work. But I'm at home with my mother and I'm able to help her with my father's care. By the time I'm well, my father's his health has declined rapidly. I mean, way down. So I'm there to help her with him. And there were times, and she tells me this now, there were times that she knew that if I had not been there, she would know, she didn't know what she would have been able to do, because my father was just that bad off. And he passed the day after Christmas, just past Christmas. And almost immediately after that, all the things that I had been trying to do started falling into place. I got my 501c3. I got my EIN number. I got all of these other things that I ended up getting my mental health peer specialist certification. All these things that I had wanted to do, but had struggled to do prior to this, I started seeing come to fruition. And I'm thinking, and I'm sure that this is God saying, okay, you did what I needed you to do. So now I'm going to bless you to do some things that you want to do. I don't think he's done with me just yet, because we've got my mission is, as a mental health peer specialist and as a reentry specialist, is to help the guys getting out of prison understand what their trauma looks like and how to get on the other side of that trauma, so you don't keep doing the same things over and over and over again, because
But
nobody's
I thought there were a
doing
lot of programs for that. I mean, are you saying that there's still a void?
that. Absolutely.
Because we're always talking about ways
Yeah.
we can try to help fill that void, but we don't necessarily know how.
There are no programs who initially address and follow their progress from the beginning. I think we would be one of the first, I'm not sure, but I think we would be one of the first to require that before they join our organization, one of the prerequisites is that you go get a mental health evaluation.
That's what you do with your
With the New Leaf project, right. The first thing that you need to do is get a mental health evaluation.
Is that free? Can you get that free?
Yeah. Yeah, you can go, Ben Taub will do it for you. As a matter of fact, you don't have to go to Ben Taub. Texas Workforce Commission.
Okay.
If you go to Texas Workforce Commission and tell them that you need to get a mental health evaluation, they'll do that for you in lieu of them putting you in their program to help you get a job.
Make sure you're stable enough to be able to
Yeah.
maintain the job and kind of adjust back to society.
Yeah.
But once you get that evaluation, what do you think the best way is to help? Like, what helped you?
Well, with mental health,
Because some people really have mental health conditions
Right.
instead of anger issues
Right.
or trauma issues. You know what I mean? Because you held on to something that you didn't know how to let go of.
Right.
Because a lot of people are bullied, but they somehow have the tools to let go of it.
Right.
For some reason, you couldn't do that.
Right.
But you had to have someone help you put that little boy to rest
Exactly.
and let him grow up. Because
Right.
you know, you apparently maintain that 12-year-old mentality throughout your life.
Mm-hmm.
And so at some point you have to almost be the father that you want, or the Muhammad Ali, or the idol that you want, or something to talk to and help that child transition and process that properly. A lot of us do stay stuck with the thoughts we had as a child, and we still think it through our adult eyes. But you do need help doing that.
Yeah, and that's what I want to ask too. At what point, because I think that'll be a good, as we get ready to wrap up, at what point did you know that you had really addressed that 12-year-old?
Well, that's an extremely valid point and a good point, because my ex-wife and I had that same conversation. My mother told my ex-wife to look up Arrested Development, because what we found out is that once you go to prison, most people who go to prison, whatever age you go to prison, that's the age that you stop maturing emotionally, psychologically,
Right.
and all of this. So you go to prison at 12, 13. So now we know some guys who've been to prison at 12 and 13 years old.
Yeah, I do too.
You get out, 20 years later, you're a 32-year-old, 12-year-old.
Right. So how do you walk through those steps?
Well, what you have to do first and foremost is and that's why we say that you have to get an evaluation, because the first thing that you have to do is understand that you've got an issue.
Right.
If you don't understand it, if you don't accept that you've got an issue, then there's no help for you.
Right, exactly.
So if we send you to get a mental health evaluation and they can tell you that you've got some issues, then we can help you find places that will give you counseling, find places, and that's one of the things that we do as mental health peer specialists. We don't treat you. We help you find places that will treat you. We help you find places where you can go that will give you treatment for whatever it is that you're dealing with. So for me and for the guys that we talk to and deal with, our thing is to first get you the evaluation so you know what you're dealing with, and then we point you in the direction. I can't cure you,
Right.
and you have to decide that you want to be better. But I can tell you the places that you can go that will help to cure you, that will help you find your way. So that's what we do, and then there are going to be some other things that we're going to do coming up in the future, in the very near future, where we can help to get you to those places, so you don't have to worry about getting on the bus and getting lost and all this other thing. We can find you a place where you can talk to and fellowship with other men who are dealing with the same things, so that you can find out how they made progress, what might have worked for them, maybe it'll work for you, things of that nature.
Okay, all right. Well, we have 2 minutes to wrap it up. So, Damion, do you want to ask or add any comments?
Yeah.
And we'll let you round it out. You can talk to the audience and tell them what you want to know about your program and how you're moving forward and how you'd like to help others move forward.
I'll say take probably about 45 seconds and talk about the good thing that happened where you went to Africa.
I try not to ever toot my horn, but
Damon's gonna make you
me toot my horn. God blessed me to work with the organization called Every Village to go to South Sudan and Uganda to do some filming and photography work with their nonprofit. And it was probably, and not probably, it was the most moving experience I've had in my life, because I never thought I would get a chance. I thought because of my conviction, I would never get a chance to go to Africa. I went to Africa. We slept in tents, and I thought I was in a luxury hotel. I was so happy. It didn't matter to me. And fellowship with the men and women there, fellowship with the people there, with the kids. I actually had opportunity to go to a prison in South Sudan. And brothers in prison in Texas or in the United States need to quit complaining. I mean, I know you want to be out, but there was a 15-year-old kid sitting as far as from here to you in front of me in a prison full of men, and he was maybe 4.5, 5 foot tall.
What had he done? What had a child that little done to be in prison?
He had
like
accidentally killed a guy. They knew it was an accident, but his family, the guy that he killed, their family wanted to kill him. So they put him in prison with these grown men for his protection. So going to Africa was eye-opening as well. It was. I planned to go back last year, but my father got ill, so maybe in the next year or so I'll be.
Are you still with your mother?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
She sounds like she needs you.
Well, my mother is strong. My mother is, you would not believe how strong my mother is. My mother is strong. So, but I'll be there for as long as she needs me.
I know that's right. Well, we're being told to wrap up. So this was a very, very inspiring story.
Well, thank you.
Very inspirational. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for having the strength and the courage to better your circumstances.
Thank you.
And work on your mental health, because it's a struggle for us all.
It is.
Like I said at the beginning, you know, I can be the criminal, you can be the policeman. We're from the same environment, same mind. It's just about our choices.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that the struggle's not there.
Right.
So, you know, keep the struggle. And Damion, you keep going too. I'm proud of you. Keep the struggle going. Keep fighting.
I share your sentiment. I'm proud of you too, Vivian.
Thank you. You know, I do what I can.
Amen.
Because I'm from where y'all are. I just made a different choice.
That's right.
Amen. So thank you so much for watching Truth and Justice with Vivian King. And we'll be here next time for another show and another inspiring story of redemption and how to navigate your way around the criminal justice system. Thank you. Good night. Thank you for tuning in again. Tonight we have something